Recently, I was having a conversation about Yuta not knowing or seemingly have Gojo's memories, and I came to the realization my boy might be fucked.
Sometimes you gotta close the door to open a window.
Also, I apologize about the state of me right now. I'm on severe daddy duties right now. Everything's getting crazy in the household with all the preparations for future baby weave. It's very exciting, very scary, and very stressful, I'm not gonna lie to you. Anyway, this conversation came about from a buddy of mine talking to me about how Yuta not knowing Sukuna could use domain amplification inside of a domain, and to which at first I thought, the fuck? That's true, Yuta should have known this information, this should be a thing. So I went back and read the Gojo vs Sukuna fight, and lo and behold, I ended up proving myself wrong, sort of. You see, when Gojo and Sukuna fought, it almost instantly starts to use domain amp to strike Gojo when he starts to go on the offensive. In chapter 224, Sukuna breaks through Gojo's infinity, which is pretty impressive. Which, at this point, everyone who was spectating in verse was able to see this due to Mei's crows watching. Which, now that I think about it, writing this fight in a spectator fashion seems to be really fucking smart to allow everyone else to watch and not actually be involved directly, because obviously we saw what happens when everyone else starts to get involved. They just start dropping like flies. But the spectators in question here all talked about Sukuna using domain amplification to bypass Gojo's limitless, or his infinity in this case. This happened literally in the next chapter, in chapter 225, so from this point onwards, everyone, Yuta included, the most important, were now aware that Sukuna could use domain amplification. But the problem arises when Sukuna eventually wombo combos Yuta inside of a domain using domain amplification. Something Gege made certain to point out during this fight here between Gojo and Sukuna was that only we, me and you, the audience, were able to see what was going on inside of that domain expansion. The spectators in the verse, in the real world, well, in the JJK world, had virtually no idea. They were quite literally spectating a black ball, because even Mei's crows couldn't enter to get inside this domain. And this was probably due to either Sukuna's slashes or Gojo's unlimited void that would have just turned them into absolute toast. But this is where I think Gege was a little bit of a genius right here, because we fast forward over to chapter 229 and 230. However, this time at the back of 229, Sukuna finally reveals that his play with the Maharaga is the first step in Sukuna adapting to Gojo's domain. Naturally, no one spectating in the verse saw Maharaga appear until Gojo's domain is broken. And this is where we're treated to some very specific information here. Because Sukuna tells us, in front of the crows, so everyone else will be privy to this information, they'll all be in the know now, is that Unlimited Void, an ability that activates once inside your domain. Honestly, I figured it was going to be a real pain. That's why my first move was to take that card out of the deck. While unable to use domain amplification within the domain, I had Megami adapt Unlimited Void using his 10 Shadows technique. And as a result, I couldn't use any other chaos technique other than what was imbued to the domain. Now, it's here that I believe Sukuna was either very specific with his wording, or it's a translation difference. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to get into the translation difference, which, let's be honest, it could be the case. They are genuinely the final enemy and the final boss of JJK here. But from the spectators in verse, from their perspective, watching Sukuna to talk about this, they're hearing two things. One, Sukuna saying that he was unable to use domain amplification inside of the domain. Two, Sukuna saying he needed Maharaga to adapt to Unlimited Void. To add into this, Gojo himself was even surprised that Sukuna was able to use domain amplification while inside of the domain. And if I'm honest, if you could surprise Gojo, then you might just be an absolute menace. But also in chapter 225, we see everyone talking about Gojo's infinity. And while inside a domain expansion, his infinity is basically useless against sure hits, as Yuji backs up this point and says way back when, in chapter 15, Gojo tells him that himself, with Jogo stating in that same chapter, now we're inside my domain, my Jujutsu will reach you. Jujutsu back then obviously meant his chaos technique. So within all this within mind here, the students would assume two things. One, Sukuna has stated he is unable to use domain amplification inside of a domain. Two, he wouldn't even need it anyway due to the domain sure hit and negating it, essentially. Now, here is where the problem lies. Number one, the students are fucking idiots. Like, straight up. It's even stated throughout this fight that both Gojo and Sukuna keep doing things that seem utterly impossible within the realm of Jujutsu sorcery. So maybe take some fucking initiative here and don't rule it out, but also, to play devil's advocate, I can see why they would rule it out. Because, number two, And this is the biggest fucking problem. If we take all of the evidence that I've given here and give the students the benefit of the doubt, and they assume that Sukuna isn't able to use domain amplification inside of a domain, as Angel even backed up the point on Yuta having taken over Gojo's body here, he should have known, in my opinion, via the memories. And this is where I'm conflicted on this section of the story, because while I do really like the development of this character for Yuta here, because obviously the signs for Yuta taking over Gojo, they've been there all along, and it's quite cool how Gege wrapped it up. But I do think ultimately the moment Yuta stepped into Gojo's body, he should have known about this, in my opinion. And I'll provide some more evidence if you'd like for this. Once Yuta stepped foot onto the battlefield, Yuta popped his domain expansion, and he employed the exact same tactic that Gojo did and condensed his domain, meaning Yuta knew how Gojo did that, meaning in some way he had access to Gojo's memories, because obviously we've never seen Yuta do that, and Gojo did that through his experience in the prison realm, which obviously Yuta hasn't experienced. So for Yuta and able to do this and condense his domain, that means he sort of had Gojo's experience and memories to be able to do that, right? Now, you could argue that Yuta and Gojo potentially practiced this during the time skip, and Gojo put it into play on the fly against Sukuna. But again, I still stand by the statement that once Yuta stepped into Gojo's body, he should have received those memories. You could even argue that Yuta used copy and copied how he changed his domain, but as we're aware, Yuta can only copy chaos techniques, so that wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. But again, there's also a lot more arguments that you can make here, and you could argue that it was a muscle memory, allowing Yuta to employ the same tactics as Gojo with his condensed domain, and not the actual memory experience. But the more I think about it, the more the situation looks extremely scuffed for Yuta right now. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know how I feel about the possibility that Yuta will die in Gojo's body personally. I think that's... Actually, you know what? That's a fucking lie. I think I will probably hate it if that happens personally. I have to trust Gege and his ability to cook, because every time something like this comes up, I always am steadfast in saying, let him cook, let him cook. But the more I think about this situation, the more I'm like, what the fuck is going on? And maybe, like I said, give it 10, 15 more chapters or so, we'll probably sit here and go, oh, well, that's what that fucking meant. That's how we did that. So, yeah. Anyways, let me know what you guys think of the video in the comments down below. Is my boy Yuta cooked or nah? And as always, make sure to go tell someone you fucking love them. Go drink some fucking water. Much fucking love. Big fucking kisses. And you will see my disheveled ass in the next video. Much fucking love. Peace.